It all begins with what your vision looks like, because there are several ways of creating a team, because honest to God, everyone tries to think that their model is better than anybody else's, and this is not for me to impose what I think is better for you, though I will tell you what I am doing currently, and I will tell you what other people have done, and you can make a decision for yourself as to what you personally think is best here. It is very important to pay attention to, like, what is your vision for your team? Because I was just actually having a conversation, funny enough, today with a very large team leader who has a team of about 50 people. What's important to pay attention to when it comes to somebody like that, who does hundreds of millions a year in production, is that they have a specific vision. He is looking to build a team, we were just talking about what his vision was, and he's looking to build a team of 300 agents nationwide. Awesome, right? 300 agents nationwide that he's supporting, and obviously in some key markets. That's his vision. And then I have some conversations with other people where they want to have a massive amount of same type of maybe production or income levels, right? Like both of them want to have substantial amount of income, but one person might choose to do a smaller Navy SEAL-like team where they don't have hundreds of individuals working for them. They maybe have half a dozen, and they're all just support staff. And this way it just supports that one agent in doing a lot of business. It's what type of vision do you have? Do you want to have a huge sales team, or do you want to have a very, very small, knit, tight sales group who just really support you, right? And allow you to sell a lot of real estate specifically. Where, just to give you an understanding, if you're gonna have a small, tight team, which is what I have today, I have a small team that does nearly almost $3 million a year in gross income. Small, tight team, it's technically 3 people, right? 3 people, $3 million a year. And I have some people who have mega teams where they do 15 million a year, but they have 300 people working for them. And you gotta feed 300 people on 15 million. So it's sort of like, what do you really want, right? Like, I wanna have as high of a net income as possible with the least of amount of employees, right? That's my vision. But I also wanna have the biggest team out there that I'm coaching for free through my EXP team, right? That's part of my goal, right? I have, a massive amount of individuals on my EXP team, and I coach a lot of them for free, right? It's one of the perks of being a part of that team. Now, I'm looking to build that EXP team because it's a different way of growing it, where I just want to focus on the training and the processes and the systems around supporting them, right, on the training side, versus actually supporting them with like actual support staff, right? So very different, somewhat different models, and you get to choose what you want. So that's the first thing I want to just get through building this foundation here together, is that it depends on the type of vision you have. Now, if you are the type of individual who wants to build a massive sales team, I want you to pay attention closely, because we're going to touch on a few points that I'm going to specifically say this is more for that, right? Which is heavy recruiting. It is a massive recruitment model. If you want to have a big sales team, if you want to have a massive sales team one day, it's going to be a revolving door, because just understand, you're not going to have zero attrition. You're not going to have 0 people leave you ever, right? You're going to have people who leave, and you need to be constantly recruiting and building up an arsenal of recruitment and promotional strategies to bring more people into your orbit. You're going to have to build up these, these different facets to bring people to you so that you can recruit them, right? Like there's going to be multiple types of promotion and prospecting that are going to have to happen to make sure you can be constantly filling and feeding your team. Now, if you're obviously on the other side of the coin, I'm always interviewing, and I'm constantly looking to fill the next roles, and I'm also looking to replace people all the time. I know that the people who work for me are definitely 7, 8s, and 9s only, right? 3 people on my team besides myself, 7, 8s, and 9s only. Now, the thing, I don't have anybody who works for me who's a 10, and if I happen to find somebody who's a 10, I will let somebody go and I will hire a 10. That's just what works, right? Like, that's what you're supposed to do. If you find 10s, you're gonna hire, you should be hiring 10s and up-leveling your team all the time. No, don't get me wrong, if I have an empty spot on my org chart, which I have a few right now of what people I'm trying to hire, if I find a powerful player who's a 10, I'm obviously gonna hire them. If I see a 6, I might not hire them, because it's not something that I desperately need to fill, or my team's not gonna operate. There's a difference there. So if you're getting massive value out of this video and you want to work with me personally, make sure you check out the first link in the description down below and schedule your free consultation with myself and my team. I want to be constantly interviewing on both sides, but it's who you're interviewing. Because if you're looking to build a massive sales team, you need to be constantly feeding the pipeline of people you're going to be bringing on board and have all these promotional strategies. When you're hiring just more support roles, you'll be interviewing a lot, but also it's not going to truly affect your team today if you're not bringing on people, because most of the time your support staff is going to stay longer than a salesperson, right? Salespeople tend to leave more frequently than a support staff member. Now that we've laid a foundation, it's incredibly important to pay attention to the fact that you need to put this on paper, and it's called an org chart. You want to know what you want to fill a position, hire to a position, not just hire to hire. Because what often people do is they, randomly have a friend, and the friend goes, hey, do you need any support? I really am looking for a job. I can do paperwork stuff. And you're like, oh yeah, you could help me with, with paperwork. That would be great, thanks. And then you hire somebody and then it doesn't work out. You're like, why didn't that work out? The reason is you need to create an org chart. And on your org chart, you're gonna have you at the top, and then you're gonna have a bunch of lines and then circles around different positions that you're gonna try to fill. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna give an outline of what that position is, what they're going to do, what's required, and what kind of personality type they should have. Because it's very important that you're constantly not only trying to replace people, but you're constantly trying to enhance the team. You're gonna hire to an org chart, right? Like, so if you're interviewing somebody and they happen to be a possible good fit for that position, you should hire them. But if they're a fantastic individual, maybe an 8 out of 10, which is still pretty good, and they don't fit the org chart, you don't just hire them to hire them. That is not how it works, because that's what ends up happening to a lot of people, and then all of a sudden you have a huge team of support members who just don't need to be there. I've done that. I've hired decent people because they were good people, and there were a bunch of 5s, 6s, 7s, and 8s, and I was like, I didn't really need them, but I was like, yeah, I'll hire them to do something and I'll figure it out later. Huge mistake. My goal is to have the least amount of employees possible and make the most money possible. If I can make $100 million a year with 1 employee or 0 employees, I would do that. That's my vision. I'm not saying that has to be your vision. If you want to make $1 million a year and employ hundreds of people, great, that's awesome. You do you. But I'm saying you want to have an org chart that builds to what you want to create and hire to the position, not hire the person. You're gonna want to make sure you hire the person as well, but it's to the position. You're not gonna hire the person to hire the person, because that's what ends up happening to people who make big mistakes when it comes to hiring. Now, one thing to also pay attention to is that if you are interviewing people, right, and they are a 10 out of 10, I definitely would find a way to say, how do you shift these positions to possibly hire a 10? Like, can you actually eliminate a position and hire a 10 so that you take 2 or 3 positions and turn it into 2 or 1 position? This is the only thing that I would do, possibly to enhance your business, where, like, again, if you happen to come across a 10 out of 10 employee, how do you take 2 or 3 positions and convert it to 1 position that this person can dominate? And if they actually would do a fantastic job in that role, then you can hire them. If they're not actually gonna be a great person in that position, you can't hire them, right? It just doesn't make any sense, because you can hire a 10 out of 10 individual who's a 10 out of 10 salesperson, but it doesn't mean they're gonna be a 10 out of 10 support person. It just doesn't make any sense. You have to hire to the position. Another big thing to take away when it comes to building a team is to always hire through profit first. The biggest mistake people make is that they hire through ego and through the sake of growth, other than the true reason, which should be through profit. Because if your company is profiting a lot of money, then you should hire an individual to support the growth of the company, not hire somebody because you want to just hire somebody. That doesn't make any sense. So if the capital is there and you had 3 or 4 good months of profit and cash flow, then you could hire an individual. But you don't go to hire somebody first before the profit is there. It just doesn't make any sense. If you have a team right now that's making $10,000 a month and you make your first hire, and now your expenses are around $5,000 or $6,000 a month, so you're netting $5,000 a month as an example. Now you're netting $5,000 a month with that 1 employee. Until that $5,000 now goes back to 10, or now it goes to $20,000 a month in net profit or more, you should not be hiring another person. It doesn't make any sense. Now let's say you're at 10,000 by yourself, you hire somebody, and now you're down to net 5. Now you build it up to net 10,000 again. Think about this. You probably shouldn't hire somebody, now that you just got back to even again, you wanna supersede the even, where you were before. Now that one individual that you hired doesn't take you to at least a 2 or 3 multiple on net income, it does not make any sense to hire another person, or you should replace that person. Because I have some people where their income was $10,000 a month, and then they hired an assistant. And then after they hired that assistant, their income went to $20,000 or $30,000 or $40,000 a month. I'm an example of that. My income went from $10,000 a month to $50,000 a month when I hired a good assistant. However, I've also hired an assistant, and my income went from $10,000 a month to $8,000 a month. I started making less money because I just had overhead, because the person wasn't actually supporting me the way I needed to be supported, and I had to do double the work. You can see the difference, right? If that person's a good hire, that person will double your income at a minimum. So your net income should go from $10K a month. Now you hire somebody at $3,000 a month, or I'm making an example, plus a couple expenses, you're at net 5. Now you should go to net 20 before you hire your next individual. And now after you hire your next individual, you should go to net 30 or net 40 before you look to hire another individual. That's the Navy SEAL team. If you're on the scale of big sales team, your team might not be congruent to profit right away. Because if you're hiring somebody who maybe hasn't done any business in the past, but they're like, it's a brand new realtor and they're super hungry, it might take them time to get into production. If you're hiring people who only do 10 deals a minimum a year already, and they're looking to scale to do 20 or 30, that would probably be somewhere I would start. Is people who are already doing doing some good business, but they just don't want to do all the transactional paperwork, and you can support them because maybe you're doing 60, 70, 80, or 100 transactions and they look up to you, and now they can be on your team. You'll handle their transactions, you're going to mentor them, you're going to train them, you're going to give them all the support and the mentorship and the marketing and all the extra services that they're going to be able to have on your team, where now they can go from 10 deals a year to 12 to 15 to 20 to whatever, even though they're going to have a little bit of a commission split now. But that's the purpose here. We're going to have people who come in and then they should increase your business. And within the first 90 days of somebody being with your team, especially if they're already producing income previous to being on your team, and they start going backwards, get rid of the team member. This is what's incredibly important to pay attention to, because if they're not making you money, it doesn't make sense to keep them. If they're not making you more dollars, then it doesn't make sense to keep them. Keep that in mind. When you're growing your team, you need to grow through profit first. Now, when it comes to growing your team, it's also very important to understand the interview process. I'm a big fan of at least interviewing somewhere between 5 and 10 people before you ever make your first decision to hire somebody. Interview a lot of people so you can make the best decision of what you've got. Because sometimes what happens is that you interview one person and you kind of had a good feeling about them, and then you hire them, and then you didn't actually, interview many people, and you didn't realize that, like, wait a second, there was actually a couple of red flags here, and I didn't notice that because you didn't interview anybody else. And by the way, what does an interview look like? Well, not only should you ask them about their history and their background, I don't really care about degrees, but I'm a huge fan of, like, what did you do previous to this? Why is it so important to you to have a job like this? What interests you about joining my team? Why do you want to work for a company like mine? What interests you about in the real estate world? What experiences do you have in the past? And, like, what is your vision for the future? What are your goals? How much money would you love to make within the next 3 to 5 years? What does your life look like in the next 3 to 5 years or 20 years, right? What type of company are you looking to work for? What gets you excited to go to work in the morning? How do you feel appreciated most? Compliments, extra money, bonuses, trips. What makes you actually feel like most taken care of at work? When you're doing interviews, it's important to also have situational questions asked, right? Like, okay, hypothetically, a client calls you up pissed off, super pissed. Something went completely wrong and it was your fault. What would you do? How would you handle the call? Like, how quickly would you notify me? Are they gonna notify you at all? Are you gonna, like, what are you trying to find out here? Like, you understand my point here? You want to understand things underneath the hood. Give them circumstances, really tough situational stuff. Let's say we just get into an argument, a disagreement, where, like, I just don't agree on something. How would you expect something like that to be handled? How would you expect me to respond in a moment like that? And then you can dive into, and by the way, this is not a time for you to coach them. This is a time for you just to ask questions, because all these things are gonna happen probably eventually. But if an attorney calls you and says, hey, I just wanna let you know, I don't wanna work with you guys anymore. X, Y, and Z happened. I'm not interested in working with you anymore. How would you handle that? Right? Like, you wanna ask some questions like, okay, let's just say that you had 5 minutes left of your day. It's 4:55. Like, something really important came up. What would you be doing? What time do you typically show up in the morning? On an average, if you work 9 to 5, what time do you typically show up and what time do you typically leave? You want to ask these questions now because it's going to give you an inclination. Like, hey, during the interview process, you said that you typically show up at 8:45 and you leave at 5:15 for a 9 to 5 shift. Actually what happens is that you're showing up at 9:10 and you're leaving at 4:55 every day. That's not what my expectation was of this position. You understand how this can save you later, from later down the road and having very tough conversation when now you can have them up front. Well, typically I show up at 9 o'clock and I leave right at 5 o'clock. Well, I don't really want to hire somebody because that typically means that they're gonna not get started working until 9:15, and they're probably not gonna eat, they're not gonna be doing anything for the last 15, 20 minutes of the day if they're gonna leave right at 5 o'clock because they have to pack up. And I've seen employees do that. And I don't know if I've hired anybody, watching this video, but I've seen employees do that a lot. And that's not good because, again, this was years ago where I made the mistake. I did not pay attention to those things and I didn't even ask those questions up front. That's why interviewing questions are so important to be, especially when they're situational. What can I expect for you in this position? What do you expect from me? And just don't coach. Ask great, powerful, thought-provoking questions. When you're building a team, it's very important to also pay attention to your culture. What is your culture vision? What do you want it to look like in the next 3, 5, 10, 20 years? What do you want your culture to be known for? People on your team, how do you want them to feel when they show up to work, and how can you create that? And that's why when you're building a team, that's the focus, right? You hire to the org chart, but you want to have the underlying tone of the company. What is the culture you're looking to create? What is the vision you're looking to create? And that's what you're building. So when you're hiring somebody, do they actually subscribe to your type of culture, or do they just not fit the mold? Do you understand what I'm saying here, right? Like, if you have a culture that's all around accountability, respect, drive, fun, excitement. If that's the type of culture you have and you bring somebody on who's really dull and boring, you're not doing a good job upholding the culture you want to create. And you can solve that before the problem even starts. You also need to be asking yourself, as you're building this team, what type of culturally active things are you going to be doing with your team? Do you do volunteer work? What type of fun activities are you doing on a weekly or monthly basis with your team? How are you gifting and appreciating and showing love for your team? How are you doing with your clients? I mean, it's very, very important that you're following all these types of small things to create the culture around what you want to create. Does your branding fit the mold for what your culture looks like? Do the people who are looking at your branding, which again, in one of the other modules, we'll talk all about branding and all about this, but specifically when it comes to team building, it's like, how are you holding your culture tight? How are you keeping people accountable to having your culture stick for the longevity of your company? And the way you do it is all about accountability to your team, where if people aren't following it, you either fire them or put them on a personal improvement plan, right? Like the personal improvement plans is very important, where like now you're showing the team, like, I don't stand for things that are not aligned with our culture. And I don't want you to stand for things like that either. We deserve the best. Our clients deserve the best here. And holding everyone to that, which might sometimes take firing somebody, letting somebody go, and just not allowing that culture to be diluted. Because I've also kept people who are cancerous to my culture stay too long, and then my culture was destroyed and people left in droves. I mean, I've had some times where, 6 or 7 people left at a time, and it's very upsetting. I mean, this is years ago, and again, I learned my mistakes, but that's because I allowed cancerous individuals who did not live up to the cultural standards that we should have been living up to stay on the team too long, and or just be on the team in general. Shouldn't have even had them in the beginning. So that's why you do a lot of this upfront expectational work in the interview processes to make sure you don't have that problem in the future. Now, when it comes to building your team, it's also very, very crucial to understand the training aspects. Now, we've talked about training in other parts of these modules. When you're having training, it's understanding that, like, what value prop do you have for somebody coming onto your team? What value proposition can you create? Why do people want to work with you? What does your training look like? How often do you do training? What is the training about? Like, who is doing the training? Do you have guest speakers? Do you have a coach who does your trainings on your team, right? Like, this is why we're hired to do in-house trainings for, and coaching for sales teams, right? Like, this is what, a big part of what the coaching program does here, for my coaching programs, right? Like, that's what it's all about. Like, is like, listen, I'm a huge fan of self-development. And if your team does not have the certain levels of accountability when it comes to training and growing themselves, when it comes to the culture and the mindset that they have walking into their company, right? Your company, how do you expect them to grow? If you're not training, right? If you're not working on yourself and betterment of your team, who is? You can't just assume that anybody else is doing it. That's your job. One thing that I do want to stress here when it comes to your team building is that your culture and your training, the value proposition that you create here, is what is most important. That's the foundation of why people will join you. Your culture and that value proposition, the training, like that combined, right? Like, that's why people are going to want to come to you. What value proposition, what are you offering the world to want to work with you, right? These other agents, these support members, like, why would they want to work with you over your competition? Because everyone's, like, the people who are looking for a job, they have a lot of options. And there's why would they want to work for you versus your competition? Well, your culture, how you treat people, and your value proposition to what you have to offer these individuals is what is most important. Essentially, the whole purpose of a monthly meeting is to do a major recap of last month and constantly vision casting and constantly checking your goals and saying, like, okay, well, this was what our mission was to accomplish by next month or into this year, next quarter, whatever that is. Are you on track? Are you off track? How can you constantly be shifting and adjusting? That's the purpose of this meeting. And you want to do this every single month. Every single month after month, you're going to be specifically looking at how you did last month and how you can improve. That is the purpose of a meeting, right? Looking at data, how did you do, and how can you adjust and improve, right? That is essentially the whole purpose of a lot of these meetings. And the same thing when it comes to, now again, throughout your weeks, you can talk about one of the weeks can be on branding, one of the weeks can be on lead generation, one of the weeks can be on client service, one of the weeks can be on culture for the team. How are you doing, and how can you improve? That's it, guys. We talked about daily team meetings. We talked about weekly meetings. We talked about monthly. Now let's talk about quarterly and annually. If you're guessing that you're just essentially going to do a greater version of the other ones, yes, that is exactly right. Because you're going to be looking at past quarters now and doing an aggregate. But you're also, the biggest shift and adjustment that I want you to be paying attention to is when it comes to quarterly and annual meetings. It's making sure you make it fun. With your monthly meetings, you could also, have a caterer. You can do whatever. You can have it in a restaurant. But when it comes to quarterly and annual meetings specifically, you want to make sure you go do it in a fun fun area. Go do an activity, right? Go have fun with your team where there's the professional aspect and then there's obviously the fun aspect of it, like the personal and professional, like where you can kind of mix it. And specifically when you're doing quarterly meetings, you want to like go out and go do it at a fun place. Get out of the office. Go do it somewhere fun. I don't care if it's at a restaurant or somewhere outdoors or something where you can have a good time, have some team collaboration, and work on your business at the same time, right? And your annual meetings should be, again, how did you do last year? What is the game plan for this year, right? Like my annual meetings are so much fun because sometimes we'll, you know, again, I'm in New Jersey, we'll go down to Atlantic City, we'll have a fun time, we'll go gamble a little bit, we'll go have a nice dinner, and then the next day we'll have it in a boardroom, whether it's back by one of our offices or anything like that, but we'll kind of have a collaborative thing where it's a lot of fun, team building exercises, whether in the office or just having fun at the casino, whatever it is, we just like to have fun. So we want to have fun, and we also want to make sure we're keeping it super professional, and we get what needs to also get done. The meetings, again, it's how are you doing and how can you improve? So talk about training. Training is a quick, simple point that I want to make here. So for training, first and foremost, is that it should be duplicatable, which means that it should be recorded content and everyone watches the same content, and then they can be, you ask them a couple key questions, they go through a shadow, there should be a process for training. Number one, it should be recorded, which we try to do a lot of stuff recorded on Loom and YouTube, unlisted videos. So those are typically our best types of content, as well as watching previous trainings. We'll record all of our trainings, we'll have that recorded so people can watch them over and over and over again. Also, when it comes to training, you want to make sure that every single person, they not only, like you said, it's duplicatable and they're watching the recorded content, but you want to make sure that it's done in the same process every single time. Because if you can't control the training, it's like if you're trying to teach someone how to ride a bike. If you try to teach someone how to brake before they even know how to pedal, or you understand what I'm saying? Like there has to be a step-by-step process. Like again, if you want to teach someone how to cook, probably a better example, but if you want to teach someone how to cook, you're going to want to teach them what kind of ingredients to get first. And then you're going to want to teach them how the stove works. And then you're going to want to teach them how everything works to get, right? You're not going to just like, all right, you're going to want to throw, a steak on the grill. Like they don't even understand, like, how do you find the right steak? Explain to me that process, right? Step-by-step process, just like the transactional part we started at the very beginning. Everything should be super duplicatable and systematic, where it's step 1, step 2, step 3, whatever. Also, when it comes to training, there needs to be also a lot of collaborative team effort, where I would start with people shadowing as soon as possible. And if, when it comes to shadowing, making sure people get on the phones ASAP, because what I see happening a lot of time is that sometimes people wait a month to let someone get on the phone.
When you get somebody on the phone within the first week, honestly, the first day.
My intention is get someone on the phones ASAP, because the longer you prolong the process around getting someone on the phones for the very first time, you're gonna just delay their growth. So I like to try to get somebody on the phones within the first few days of them joining the team. They're gonna shadow a few times, they're gonna watch a ton of video content. People on our teams sometimes watch 10 hours of content before they're even allowed to be on the phones, right? It's very, very crucial that you pay attention to the fact of like, it needs to be duplicatable. How fast can you get them into production? What is the process behind, from initial onboarding, which will be next, through the training process, and then get them on their way, right? And now let's just say you have a team that's now consistently doing well. How do you consistently get training for your team? And if it's just you, what kind of training are you doing? What kind of coaching are you doing? Are you a part of my coaching program? If not, we should be talking about it. And or what coach do you have right now that you're constantly being held accountable for? Because if you're not constantly growing and working on yourself, right, how do you expect your team to be working on themselves if you're not doing it yourself? Very, very important to say, like, training and mentorship and coaching is all kind of collaborative here. Do you do something weekly? Do you do something monthly? What type of expectation are you setting with your team? Setting that all up when it comes to training, like, listen, you want your team to be constantly, when it comes especially to sales, we do this all the time for my sales teams and all the sales teams that we coach. It needs to be done several times a week. We have one big meeting once a week, but there's also lots of smaller meetings that we set up where, like, there needs to be constant accountability to the sales trainings, right? Tons of training and accountability for it, because you're not just done, right? You don't just do one training and you're done, right? You need constant levels of accountability forever, right? To make sure everything's being essentially done. So let's talk about onboarding real quick. Onboarding is also a fairly simple process, or at least it can be if you do it right. With onboarding, the big things to pay attention to are the following. Number one, hire slow, fire fast. So when you're bringing on people, it's important to understand that the first part, when it comes to the interviews, you should be interviewing always. You should always be interviewing and looking for the best of the best talent and looking how to replace people on your team. I'm just being honest. You need to be looking at who can you be replacing on your team, because they're not cutting, they're just not cutting it, right? Because if they're a 7 or lower on a scale of 1 to 10, they're a 7 or lower, they're bringing your team down for the most part. Or even, like, again, because some people don't even have 7s, they have a bunch of 4s that are on their team, right? When it comes to their level of efficiency and production, and you're just keeping them around to keep them around. It doesn't make any sense. You only want to have the best of the best people around you. Constantly bringing in more people to interview. If you find the right players, make sure you disc assess them. Make sure you do several interviews, not only with yourself, but everybody on your team should interview them. See how everybody else likes them. Have them take the color-coded personality test because you want to understand how to speak to them and what type of personality type will fit the role that you're actually looking to hire. When you're doing the interviews, make sure you have situational questions going on, because if you're not doing situational-based interviewing, you're just gonna end up hiring everyone who has a decent personality, which doesn't make any sense. You wanna have situational-based interviews where you're gonna give them a situation. What would you do in this situation? What would be your first, second, and third step in this situation? Who would you call? What support would you ask for? Would you even ask for support? You wanna ask these questions and like actually go walk through how they process situations in their head. Now that you're at, let's say you chose to hire somebody, how are they being paid? Like, or how are they being compensated? Are they hourly? Are they part, are they 1099? Are they salaried? Like, how are they being, how are they being compensated? Have you spoken to your attorney on how to best compensate somebody and what the ramifications are tax-wise for each one, and how to set yourself up for success? What documents need to be signed? There's a lot of things you need to be paying attention to even before you even talk about training and all that other stuff. When it comes to onboarding, what process are going to be having? What background checks are you doing? Do you do a credit check on these people? Do you want to even just make sure your team pays their bills, right? Like, there's a lot of things to be looking into before you just bring somebody on board, which, essentially, like, this is even just pre-onboarding, let alone anything else, right? Now that you brought somebody on board, you got to walk them through the training period. What does a training process look like, right? So it's kind of like everything's intertwined. So just want to make sure you have a process for every single aspect of your company. Everything matters. All right, the last thing we're going to be talking about is tracking. So when it comes to tracking, it's very important you pay attention to the fact that error on the side of more being tracked than less. It's just not enough to say, well, we listed this many properties last month, we have this many properties that are currently pending, and we closed this much property this month, and this was our gross commissionable income this month. That's not enough. How many calls did your team make last month? How many conversations did they have last month? How many leads were generated last month, both by referral and cold? What were the sources of all of those leads, and how many of each of them did you generate? How many of those are actually hot leads that are looking to do something in the next 30, 60, 90 days versus how many of those people were looking to do something in the next year, 2 or 3? Because that's also very important to track, because you need to know the trajectory of your company. Are you slowly, are slowly going in the wrong direction? Or are you growing? How many appointments were set last week? How many appointments were then conducted last week? How many of those pre-qualification calls did you guys have last week? How many contracts were signed last week? How many new people were added to the team's network last week? Everything's super crucial here, and this is per person. Like, how many people did you meet last week? How many closings did you have last week? How many listings did you sign last week? How many offers were made? Last month. But like, all this data, like, this is the data you need to be paying attention to. All of these small metrics need to be tracked. And on top of that is like not only like the calls that they're making, but like who's being called on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis, right? Who's being called, right? Are you just calling expireds, right? Is that a large majority of the people you're calling right now? Are you calling for sale by owners? Are you calling circle prospecting? Are you only calling all of your past clients, your current clients? Are you never calling your past clients and current clients? Who are you speaking to on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, and tracking that data? How many of those calls did you make, and who were they to? Because if you don't track this type of data, which by the way, just have it in a simple Google spreadsheet, guys. You can have a Google form even linked to it, so you just have to fill out a Google form once a day or once a week. Whatever you want to do. You can fill out your productivity trackers, right, that we have, and you can just complete those and then upload all that information into a Google sheet once a week. It's whatever you want to do, but you can't not track data, because data equals growth. Data allows you to make powerful decisions based on actual results, not based off of fluff and who knows what. Tracking data needs to be done daily, and it needs to be done very intricately. And by the way, I would even say start small and grow into it. Start with just tracking how many conversations, how many leads, how many appointments were set, how many appointments were conducted, how many contracts you signed, right? Start with the basics, right? Then you can talk about how many listings you signed pretty easily, how many pendings did you have last month, how many do you have at all times, how much pending commission do you have, how many closings did you have? That stuff's pretty self-explanatory because it's being tracked by the MLS most of the time anyways, and or with your commission bills. That stuff's pretty simple. You can start tracking more and more and more as time goes on, but like the point is get started tracking data ASAP. Because the longer you go without tracking, the longer you're gonna go, but it's like stunting your own growth. And I wanna be honest, I hated tracking information. I still hate it, but I still do it. It's very, very important to have your teams, and now guess what? I have my team even hold themselves accountable to doing the tracking for me. Or you can delegate that over time. But until you're there, you need to do it yourself and get over it. Other than that, guys, there's a lot more downloadable content down below. Make sure you guys check that out, and I'll see you guys in the next module. If you're getting massive value out of this video and you want to work with me personally, make sure you check out the first link in the description down below and schedule your free consultation with myself and my team.